Hi, Tommy. Carolyn first. So here's what happened in Carolyn Talks podcast. So, what did you learn about Just World throughout the documentary, and how did you use that to connect to the music and using the music for the documentary? Because his last record serves as a soundtrack for the documentary. So, like, how did your what you learned about him guide you in selecting the songs to use for the film?
It was very much wanting to use his music. In a way, his freestyles and his music operate as his sit down interview in the documentary, where if you listen to the very first freestyle, he tells you everything you need to know. He tells you what he's dealing with, he tells you what he's going through, he tells you what's about to happen, he tells you all of it. And so I wanted to find a way for me to essentially get out of the way, for him to be able to tell his story in as honest of a manner as possible. And so the music just became figuring out like what supported that in terms of what we had, what we could find, what was correct in terms of chronology, and just really trying to allow him to tell his story as much as possible.
Was there any song in particular that stood out to you and that meant the most to you of all of the songs?
I really love the opening freestyle. And part of it is that it's one of the best songs I've ever heard. And he just made that shit up right there. And that was it. He just made it up. That was all there was to it. And so I think there was something still special to that. I really like the acoustic version of Fast, where again, he tells you all of what's going on and it's so well done. I like the freestyle that he does in Australia is also crazy. And in that it's a pre-existing track and he is rapping on the track and then there's a space and he comes in and he freestyles and he fucking nails it perfectly in that amount of time perfectly. Then he passes to himself on the track and then he picks it back up and he goes back in. And it's just insane from an artistry perspective. And so, but there's a lot of that because that's just how he operated.
I want to talk a bit more about the music and about how his music influenced him as a person and how it influenced other people because like he's known as one, I think one of the pioneers of the emo rap genre. And he was extremely young when he made such a massive impact on the rap industry because reading in the research, he I think one of his songs got over 1 billion streams on Spotify, and he's one of the few artists, solo artists, to be able to make such a massive impact on the digital age. Like we know, for instance, in the 80s and early 90s, we would have had Tupac Shakur, who is one of his icons. And for you personally, as like we know, like hip hop has such a big impact on Black culture. How did that affect you personally, being doing a documentary on someone who also has such a big impact on the music culture? Like, what was it like for you being able to work on this film and working about telling the story of someone who has such an impact on the Black music culture?
I don't have an easy answer for that one. And I think a lot of it comes down to wanting to tell his story accurately. I keep going back to that. And it's him and his story and not a music industry story. It's not this is something that has to say so much about everybody else. It's him and the things that were important to him and him being able to speak for himself. And so I think that the understanding how massive his fan base is, how massive his songs are. I mean, he's got multiple songs over 1 billion streams. He's the number 3 artist in the country on Spotify behind Drake and Taylor Swift. That's before his album dropped. And so I think there's no ignoring that he was and is very important to people and wanting to do right by them. But I think that it was wanting to tell his story with enough detail and specificity that the audience would enjoy it, but also just wanting to tell his story and offer insight into what was going on in a way that was a little bit not really trying to do everything else. And so it was just telling his story.
We've talked, of course, about the music. I want you to talk a bit about the process of making this film, like how you became involved and what was your first steps to creating this documentary. And was there anything that you did differently to how you would have than how you've done your previous films? Like, was there a special sense that you went into it with? Because since it's more music centered, was there anything about that particularly that you were like, okay, this is the way I'm going to do it versus how I've done it before?
This thing was hard as hell. It really was. I got dumped a hard drive with 8,000 clips and probably 250 hours of footage. And this was January of this year. And they were like, so we can air this in December of this year, right? And I was just like, are you fucking crazy? I was like, no. I told HBO no. I was like, yeah, I don't think so. And they were like, okay. And they came back again. They were like, so, not pushing, but like if there's a way we can get in December, it'd be great. And I was like, not promising. So I had to figure out a process in order to understand what we had. And it was literally impossible to watch every single thing and not take, I don't know, 3 years or so. And so we had to create a system where we distributed the workload in a way that we could categorize, we could tag, we could rate, we could do everything through all of these clips. And that took several months of figuring out how to actually do that and then to actually do it. And as we were going through that process, I had no idea what the film was or what the structure would be. I had no idea at all. And I really enjoyed sort of hearing him talk and seeing him do his thing. And I think reasonably early on, I sort of wondered if it was possible to tell his story through the archival primarily, but I just didn't know if we had the footage to support it, because even though there was a lot of footage, the footage hadn't been shot for a documentary. And so there was a lot of things that were entirely unusable and just did not work, and things that were vital pieces of his story. And so I didn't know if we could do it. And so my partner and I, who I cut the film with, Joe Kehoe, we just dug in. And we just dug in and started playing with stuff. And I remember cutting the opening sequence. It's one of the first things that we cut. And I cut that probably back in May. And it's almost exactly what is in the film now. And like, that was what sort of making the decision to start with the freestyle sort of allowed us to find our footing and figure out what it would be. And then we just leaned into it. We leaned hard into being able to allow him to tell his story. And then with the interviews, I made the decision that the only people that you'd see via sit-down interviews were the people that you see in the archival. And so there are no talking heads opining about, what you should feel or what this thing means. It's Juice in his own words, and then the people who were important to him, not the people who were thought of being a part of his story, not the people who were around years prior, the people who he wanted around him, the people who spent time with him, and in sort of a Wizard of Oz kind of way, where you wake up and it's like, oh, and you were there, and you were there, and you were there too. And so that was the process. Also, crazy ass thing. I was producing a movie this summer called The Perfect Find with Gabrielle Union and Gina Torres and Lala and Aisha Hines and Keith Powers. And I was lead producing this big Netflix movie at the same time I was cutting this film. And so I built a little edit suite in my producer office because I moved from LA to uh, New Jersey for this film. And I remember I'd be cutting this film, as in Juice WRLD Into the Abyss, on evenings and at night. And once we started shooting, if we were shooting in the evening, I would cut during the day and then go to set after. If we were shooting during the morning, I'd be shooting all day. And then I would go to the office after to cut and cut on weekends. And it was nuts. It was nuts.
So what you're saying is that your 2021 was crazy and you barely slept.
Yep, because we also produced another movie at the same time, which is an awesome movie, which will be out next year, and it was just bananas.
Well, you did it. You made it to the end, so congrats.
Thank you.